All right, welcome everybody. Welcome everyone in here, everybody online. Thank you so much for coming to Cougars Care today. So hopefully that's what you meant to come to. If that's not where you mean to be right now, you probably leave. But not that we don't want you, but this is Cougars Care, so that's kind of what we're doing now. So let me take off my mask in case anybody wants to read my lips. I'm Nathaniel. I'm from the Counseling Center. I'm here to facilitate for you. Well, we will spend the next hour, hour and a half together, kind of working on becoming a better listener, which is our topic for the day. So as we go throughout the presentation today, you guys should feel free to, raise a hand or just, call out a question, anything that you want to know about. Happy to answer questions as we go throughout. Also, those of you that are online, Ray is manning the chat here, so she'll be able to monitor that for you. So if you need anything, put a question in the chat. You can also direct message. I think it's signed in as Nathaniel Fernandez, so direct message Nathaniel and Ray will get back to you. Yeah, next slide, please. Today, hopefully, we're going to do, we have 4 different goals here that we'll go through. I'll try and make it as interactive as possible and not super boring. We're going to be learning about active listening. We're going to be learning about effective attending behaviors. Those are the nonverbal behaviors of communication. Then we're going to practice 3 techniques for listening well, which are paraphrasing, reflecting, and questioning. We're going to have a time in breakout sessions to actually try and practice some of those skills. Then we're going to do 2 techniques for empathic support, which will be the feel, felt, found, and the I care, I see, I want, I will. There shouldn't be anything too intense about today's workshop, but if for any reason, as you guys are talking in your groups, please give each other respect and respect everybody's differences of opinions. Somebody shares something personal, please agree to keep it personal. As I mentioned, only the lecture content's recorded today. Feel free to take a break and step away if you need to at any time. Those of you that are in the room, the bathrooms are literally right over there. So if you need to take a bathroom break, that's where they are. We'll also be discussing some mental health topics today. So those are in any way triggering to you, just take a break, go for a walk, whatever you need to do, take care of yourselves. And then finally, we're all coming at this at a different pace. Some of us are like senior psych majors here, and I might be like reviewing a lot of things you guys have heard about before. Others of us are like first year math majors or something like that. So we're all coming at this from a different perspective. So there are no dumb questions, and I encourage you to please ask as many questions as you can throughout the time today. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay, so active listening. This is the first thing that I wanted to talk about. Maybe some of you have heard the word active listening before. It's associated with like Carl Rogers and stuff. But sometimes you actually hear the word active listening. Like, I know the first time I heard it was in like an annoying like managerial training when I was working like a summer job when I was like 16. And everybody was like, oh, if like customers are mean to you, or if like you're having trouble with another staff member, you just have to active listen at them and everything will be all better, right? This is just sort of like a tool that you could use to like trick people into doing your bidding. Well, that's not true, unfortunately, right? But that is kind of the bad rap that sometimes active listening has gotten in those sort of businessy sorts of worlds. I'm going to tell it to you more about the psychological idea, the original idea behind active listening. And really, the whole idea of active listening is actively listening. I know psychologists like to do that. It's annoying with the way they do words. But listening with the intent to understand, not with the intent to reply, right? That's this little quote that we have on the screen. And it really has to come from like a deep-seated care to listen to folks, right? So, if you want to become a better listener, you have to actually want to become a better listener. You have to actually care. Right. And so that is one thing that I can't teach you here today, unfortunately, the ability to care. But there will be situations in your life where you do care, right? Whether it's a partner, whether it's a best friend, whether it's a family member, cousin, whatever, mentor figure, that you will have that desire to actively listen to. And I hope that this can kind of train you for that. So next slide, please. The big idea behind active listening, and forgive my voice is scratchy, that's why I'm chugging water, that we want to really understand the other person, try and really get into their headspace, get into their shoes, right? And then communicate that to them, that that's where we're at, that we're really trying to understand from their perspective, not understand from our perspective what they're saying. So next slide, please. And this is just a quote from Rogers, who is, again, the
guy who made up this whole idea. That, again, if we employ this as a technique, if our fundamental attitudes are in conflict with the basic concepts, it won't work, right? This is what I was just saying earlier. You have to care, and I can't teach you how to care, but if you do care, these tools are incredibly useful and effective, I believe. Next slide, please. So we're actually going through this pretty quick here. Feel free to ask me questions, stop me at any time. But we're going to go to our first handout. If you could pass up the attending behaviors, or Natalie, if you have that one. When we are listening to folks, we start off with what we call attending behaviors. These are just your nonverbal behaviors that are important for you to think about, right? So number one is eye contact. Now, generally, within this cultural context, in terms of Western academia, usually making good eye contact with somebody indicates that you're listening, indicates that you're taking them seriously, right? Now, this does vary from group to group, but this is the idea is to match the eye contact norms within the cultural space that you're in. And that typically means making eye contact to show that you're paying attention. The second one here is matching mood, right? So this is something that, like, obviously, if somebody's coming and telling you something that they're really sad about, right, you don't want to just be like smiling and happy and bubbly towards them, right? Because that's very annoying and they're not going to feel heard, right? And so when we talk about matching mood, it's pretty obvious that if somebody comes to you kind of sad, you kind of want to reflect that kind of sad. If they come up, as you're frustrated, you want to kind of be frustrated with them, right? You know, this is communicating to them that you get it, right? So I think people pretty much do this naturally, but the one space where we kind of don't do it very naturally, where we kind of get in our way, is if somebody is especially reflecting some kind of attitude that we're worried about, right? Maybe somebody's really sad and we want them to be happy, right? So instead of, when we try to match that mood, we try to be really positive about stuff. If we do that, that's not actually going to make them feel heard. That's going to make them feel like you're not listening to them, and they'll either get more sad because they feel more lonely, or more annoyed and frustrated with you, right? And so don't be afraid of whatever emotion the person is bringing to you. You have to be able to communicate it back to them and match that mood. Vocalisms is the next one that we have on there. I'll put it back. You hear me saying like all the time. That's because I'm not the best, most polished speaker, so apologies for that. But in general, minuscule vocalisms are actually kind of useful, kind of helpful. When somebody's talking to you and you just say, yeah, and then they keep going, that's actually like a useful thing that we kind of want to encourage, right? Because the point of listening is that we take up the least space possible, space in a metaphorical sense, in the conversation, right? And so if you're listening, you shouldn't be talking, right? Because that's how you listen. And so the less you say, the better. So if those minimal vocalisms, those minimal encouragers to talk are effective, then a person can keep going without you having to interrupt them, like ask a question or inject your own opinion kind of thing. So those kind of minuscule vocalisms are kind of important and show that you're tracking. Body posture, again, this is going to vary culturally, but typically, like, paying attention to somebody usually involves, like, you know, leaning slightly forward towards them, pretending you're interested, not like looking off to the side, leaning back, like just being totally out there with it. So these things should be pretty obvious, but if you can't remember it, there's an acronym SOLAR, which means square up your shoulders to the person you're listening to, open up your posture rather than closing it down. And so L, lean in slightly, E, make eye contact, and R, relax your body. Don't be like super stiff about it, right? This is the general way that you can keep an eye on those nonverbal behaviors. And then finally, the last one I have on here is idiosyncratic behaviors. So everybody has their own little tics, their own little quirks. When I was training to become a psychologist, actually, the first thing that we did was like, they had us do therapy like with an actor client that was like pretending to be stressed out about something. And they put me in a room with like a one-way mirror, like it was like a police interrogation or something like that. And on the other side stood like 10 of my schoolmates with like pencils and like paper writing down all the weird stuff I did. Like, oh, he touched his hair again. Oh, he's bouncing his leg too much. Like, oh, he's doing this or that, right? And that's like the kind of like intense scrutiny that I absolutely hated, and it was like the worst like class ever. I hated it. It was Thursday nights that I had to go do consultation group, and it was awful. And I'm here to say to you that I think that's the wrong way to train people to listen. Not just because it was traumatic for me, but because those behaviors really kind of don't matter in some ways, right? People are just people, and you can do you. You don't have to like worry about this so much. Now, if you have like some like really intense like thing going on where like you just can't stop yourself from like constantly bouncing up your legs up and down and like kicking the desk in front of you or something like that, like that's probably not so good. You know, like you want to try and tamp down on those things a little bit, but in general, I would strongly encourage you not to worry like a whole ton about these kind of idiosyncratic behaviors. Just be you. Remember the R in solar is to relax. Everybody feeling good on our nonverbals? Everybody good? Those of you online, feel free to put questions in the chat as well if you have them. That'll take us on to our next slide, please, which is questioning techniques. I also have another handout for that. That'll come around with it. So questioning is the easiest skill that I'm going to teach you today, so that's why I started with it first. Well, it's almost as easy as making eye contact. So that's why I started with eye contact first. But questioning is something that we all know how to do. Whenever we're listening to somebody, we're going to ask them questions. We're going to be interested in their life. We're going to ask them what's going on, kind of thing. And so there's not much to learn about questions that you guys don't already know. The one thing that I do want to teach you about questioning, however, is that we should ask open questions whenever possible. Now, what do I mean by an open question, right? An open question is something that can't be responded to with a yes or a no or like a number, right? So an open-ended question is something like, how did you feel when that happened, right? Versus like, did that make you mad, right? Did that make you mad? Yes, no. The conversation shuts down, right? It closes off. But if I ask, how did you feel? How did that make you feel, right? That opens up to more conversation, right? So that's the best way to kind of use questions is in that open sense, right? And there's a whole bunch of sample open-ended versus closed-ended questions on that handout that I gave you. But also another kind of thing that's a little bit more nuanced about questioning is that we kind of don't want you to do it, right? It's the most natural skill. It's the thing that we do in conversation the most often, but it's actually like the least useful skill that you can have for listening. And why is that, right? Well, the answer to why that is because a question shows what you're interested in, right? If somebody's telling you a story, you're telling me a story, and I ask, you know, A, B, C, D, E, right? And I say, wait, hold up, I want to ask a question about C, right? Then I've directed the conversation where I want it to go, right? I've taken up a large space in this conversation because I've declared which topic I'm interested in and what I want to hear more about, right? That's good, right? You know, I'm still interested, I'm still listening, right? But I've injected myself into the space more so than if I had just let the person keep talking, if I had chosen a different type of intervention. So even when I'm asking like open-ended questions, it's still guiding in the direction that I am interested in, rather than the direction that necessarily the person I'm listening to is interested in, right? And so on top of that, like we'll usually just kind of ask questions because we don't know what else to do, because like there'll be like a silence in a conversation, right? And I've got no other tools. I don't really know what else to do. I don't want it to be awkward and weird and quiet. And so I ask a question, right? And so that's another very common way that we end up using questions, and a way that's not, you know, super effective and useful for folks. So if we want to listen better to people, I am blazing through this content. If we want to listen better to people, we can do what's called paraphrasing. You can give me the next slide, Lana. So if you guys all probably know the word paraphrase, right? Because you've had to do it in all of your essays a million times, right? Get that quote from the textbook, change a couple of words in it, and put your citation so that you don't get in trouble for, you know, plagiarizing. But it's basically rewording in your own words what somebody else has said, right? That's the same thing that we're talking about when we talk about paraphrasing and listening. And this is the most common thing that people like know about when they know about active listening. Like if you're in a very small, strange space of the internet where people make memes about active listening, they make memes about paraphrasing, right? Because it does sound weird when you first say it, right? Because if somebody was telling me a story and they were saying, you know, like, oh, I just got a new cat, right? And I said, you got a new cat, right? That's a paraphrase that I've done. And that sounds really stupid and it sounds like it's going to shut down the conversation, right? But actually, I encourage you to try it because when you say something like that, the idea of a paraphrase is, so I've shown I'm understanding, right? Again, that's what Roger said was the key to all of active listening is to show the person that A, I understand them, and B, I'm showing that back to them, right? First you understand, and then you show back that you understood, right? Yes.
We had a question.
Yes, question.
Jessica asked, if somebody finishes talking or sharing, is it safe to go back and ask questions about what they said before after they're done?
Yeah, if somebody finishes sharing, should you go back and ask a question about something they said before? Thank you, Jessica. Yes, you can, certainly, but I think paraphrasing is typically a good move here, right? So questioning is not bad, right? Especially if somebody's done and they expect you to say something, right? You can't just leave a silence forever, right? So I said don't use questions just to stay afloat, but obviously don't just sit there, don't think. It's like a really bad way to show that you're listening, right? So a question would be great there, right? But also maybe a paraphrase would be great there, right? Because maybe the person has a little bit more to say, but they're just sort of stopping because they don't know if you're still paying attention, because they don't know if you're still listening, right? And so if you could say a small paraphrase back of like the last sentence that they said to you, if you paraphrase that back to them, then they understand that you're listening to them. And they might just keep going. They might start providing you more details about the cat, right? Or whatever it is in the situation. I don't know why I picked the cat. Well, I do, I know. It's because Callie was showing us her cat earlier. But like that's the kind of space that a paraphrase takes up that a question doesn't, right? It takes up less space. Whereas a question directs towards where you want to go in the conversation, a paraphrase doesn't. A paraphrase is the simplest, it's the smallest space that you can take up. And so whenever you can do a paraphrase and whenever a paraphrase will work, it's the best tool that you have for active listening. Because again, you're showing that you understand while letting the other person that you're listening to drive the conversation, take up the space in that conversation. So the good tricks when you talk about paraphrasing though, is that a paraphrase, you want to make sure it's accurate, right? So sometimes you say a paraphrase, like, unless you're like really sure, like, you got a cat, oh, you got a cat, right? That's obviously, you could put a period at the end of that statement. But like if somebody was like, you know, blah, 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 this about my ex. And I was like, yeah. So you're bothered by that question mark, right? I didn't really ask them a question, right? But I put a question mark at the end of my paraphrase, right? And the implied question mark there allows you to be wrong, right? And allows them to push back at you, right? And so that's when you make paraphrases, you make them tentatively, like you're pretending that you put a vocal question mark at the end of them sometimes if you're not really super sure about it. And that's fine, because somebody will just correct you and keep going, and also you'll get corrected. That'll help you get better into what they're talking about, right? The second thing is it's easy with a paraphrase, just like it is with a question, sometimes to interpose yourself if you're not careful, right? Whereas I could say like, ask a question about like, did that make you angry or whatever kind of thing. And that's imposing my thought process. I could accidentally sneak in like a paraphrase that shows my biases and directs the conversation in the way I want it to go, right? So whenever we're making a paraphrase, we want to be really certain not to go beyond what the person said, because that's how you make the best kind of a paraphrase, right? Everybody feeling good? We're going to get very tired because I did attending behaviors, I did questions, I did reflection, I did paraphrases. I'm going to do reflections, and then I promise we'll go into a breakout, and you guys can actually be less bored of listening to me. So one more slide, please, Lana. So the last technique that I want to teach you is what's called an emotional reflection, right? And so this whole time I've been telling you, don't use questions because you'll guide where the person is going. When you use a paraphrase, do it really short because you don't want to guide where the person is going, right? Now I'm gonna like totally 180 on you, right? The whole point of emotional reflections is to guide somebody to a certain direction, right? That's the goal of it. And so the important part about an emotional reflection, about the goal of it, is not that you're directing somebody, but where you're directing them to and why, right? So it's pretty common that a lot of us, we don't like to talk about our emotions. Some of us, you're good at talking about your emotions. If you are, good. That's a skill that you have. Please keep it. You're awesome, right? But most of us, we have a little bit of trouble expressing what's really going on, right? But if we don't express what's really going on, we can't really get somebody listening to us. We can't really get the feeling of being heard and understood if they don't understand the emotion that's underneath something, right? And so when we do an emotional reflection, what we're trying to do is take somebody out of the content to the affect. That's the psychological way of talking about it. But from the story to the feelings, right? Because the feelings are inevitably what's more important, right? If I'm telling you about, my breakup with my partner, right? If I'm just telling you a story, whatever, right? But I might feel super excited that I'm finally out of this relationship I've been trying to get out of. I might feel super sad about it. I might feel super, anxious about it, right? But all of those are to the same story, but a different emotional feeling underneath it, right? And so when we do an emotional reflection, we try and guess at what the feeling is and state it back to them. If you're having trouble, you can just use the format of you feel blank because blank. You feel sad because she broke up with you. You feel happy because you got a good score on the test. You feel anxious because you have to talk to your mom this weekend, or whatever it is, right? All of these are pushing us into the emotion rather than running from it, rather than going to our tendency to just stay in the story, right? And so just like with paraphrases, if you want to guess a little bit here, it's even more important to be tentative with your emotional reflections, because you could be wrong, and that's fine. If somebody corrects you, go with it. Even if you think, sometimes they'll correct you, you'll say oh, so you're really angry. And they'll be no, I'm not angry. I'm okay, you are, but I'm gonna go with you, because that's the point of active listening. Is I go with you where you want to go, right? And so be tentative with your guesses. Put that little verbal question mark at the end of them. But in general, that'll help you get out of just the story and into the affective content. Everybody feels good? Okay. Any more questions from the Zoom? All right. Now I've done talking to you for a bit here. Oh, I should have said there's a reflection of feelings handout. Did we hand that out? Thank you. Lisa's already all over it. I forgot to say that. If you go to the next slide, Lana, we're actually going to do something about this now. So I want to get you guys a chance to practice these techniques, okay? So we're going to get into groups of 3, and we're basically going to do a little rotation of listening and speaking, okay? So I know I scared you. I said group work. I said we're going to be okay. I promise. We're going to get into groups of 3, and one person's going to be the speaker that is being listened to, right? So they're going to tell some story about your day, right? This can be a true story. This can be a made-up story. It doesn't matter, but have a little bit of emotion behind it, right? Something you're excited about, something you're sad about, something you're worried about, something you're frustrated with, right? Some kind of emotion that's going on with it. I would encourage you to keep those emotions in a comfortable range, on a scale from 1 to 10, don't start talking about something that you're 10 anxious about right now. I don't want to stress you out right now. Pick something that's a 3 or a 4 on that scale, right? Or a 3 or a 4 frustrated, or a 3 or a 4 excited, right? Something in that general range. And we'll spend about 5 or so minutes having you talk, and we'll have a designated listener at that time, right? And that designated listener is going to do all the things that I said just now. You're going to do great attending behaviors. You're going to ask very few open-ended questions. You're going to do a lot of great paraphrasing. You're going to do some great reflections of feelings, okay? And everybody's just going to do their best, because we're all trying this for the first time. It's going to be fine. And then after 5 minutes or so, I'll stop everybody. We'll give some feedback to that person. Hey, you did great doing this reflection. Hey, you did great doing that paraphrase. And then we'll rotate, right? So then another person will listen and another person will speak. That way, eventually, everybody's done every role, right? The third person in each group is just going to kind of fly on the wallet for a minute and wait for their time to and they can help give positive feedback to the listener, right? Does everybody get it? Everybody kind of understand the scope here? Okay, great. Okay, love it. Thank you guys so much. Hopefully that was fun for you, at least, to get a little bit of vent about your day or just chat. if Lonnie, you could give me the next slide, please. So, one of the things, going back to your question about what do you do when somebody's like really like trying not to listen to you, or like maybe back to the other question of like, maybe I really want to give somebody advice, I'm really concerned for them, and I feel like I ought to give them some kind of advice. You know, maybe you're concerned for somebody's general well-being, maybe you're concerned for their safety, or maybe you're concerned they're making some, you know, difficult choices, right? Or maybe, you know, you want to give advice, but they said, you know, just listen to me, right? Like Bella's question before. So in those cases, how do we actually move a person towards the direction that we think might be useful for them? So this is like a little bonus. I told you this would all be about listening today. Well, this is the bit about talking. This is how you empathically help someone to connect somewhere, right? So this is the feel, felt, found countdown. And if you guys can pass out, I care, I see, I feel, I want, I will as well right now, because they both kind of go together. So the best way to do that is to couch whatever your advice you're going to give within the context of care and concern for the person that you're talking about, and within the context of understanding what they're talking about, right? So that's why I said before, when I was like, even if they ask you for advice, wait, listen to the problem, understand the problem first, and then go to the advice, right? You have to win the ability, you have to get the like emotional currency with the person to be quote unquote allowed to give advice, right? So one way you can do this is feel, felt, found, right? This is actually a technique that comes from like telemarketing sales. My wife used to be an insurance saleswoman, and like this was something that they learned in one of their continuing education courses. And I was like, you're using psychology for evil, stop it. But feel, felt, found, you literally just use those words. You start off with a sentence about how you feel to build empathy with the other person. You say how you felt a similar way in order to show that you understand. And then you say, I found whatever advice or solution that you think would be good. Now in insurance sales, it's buy this insurance. In feelings, it's a little bit different. Can you give me the next slide? So you could say something like, I feel how hurt you are about him breaking up with you. And I felt so hurt too after my last breakup. And it seemed like nothing at all would help. But I found in the end, though, that doing things with my friends to get my mind off things really helped. Feel, felt, found. Do you want to go to the mall together and get some food or something, right? You know, this is a way of giving advice, making a suggestion that's grounded in the empathy with the other person, right? And that's going to be much more likely to be well taken in. Another, a little bit more complicated model is I care, I see, I feel, I want, I will. If you can give me the next slide, please, Lana. But it's the same thing. You're using the same sentence stems. And this is something where feel, felt, found is really useful if somebody's already talking to you. The care, I see, I feel, I want, I will is a little bit more useful if you're noticing something in somebody that's not willing to really engage with you, right? And so that goes back to sort of Lana's question before about somebody that doesn't really want to talk, right? So I care reminds the person that you're coming to this from a place of care, of concern. I see, note whatever you've observed that's making you concerned. I feel, name your own emotions, right? How it's affecting you, what you're worried about, right? Because usually when we're confronting somebody, like, this is not really good if you're like angry at somebody. I feel angry at you because right? This is more useful for like if you're concerned about somebody, right? It can be used, I guess, in other ways, but that's the most useful use for it. I want whatever advice you propose. And I will, stating how you will support that action, right, if they choose to take that action. So again, give me the next slide. We see an actual example. So this would make a little bit more sense. So we're roommates and I care about you, right? The pre-established relationship that you have and why you care. I see that you've been really depressed recently and haven't even been able to leave the room in a while. I feel worried about you and I want you to get some help. I will be happy to walk with you over to the counseling center or the campus ministry office if you want, right? So again, you're couching all of this in your care and your own personal emotion for the person while gently noticing something. Again, this person has been depressed, this roommate's been depressed, and suggesting the solution, right? Which is wanting them to get help potentially from a counselor or a pastor, right? So this is kind of the part where I get to throw in my spiel for the counseling center, right? So like I said before, I work for the counseling center. If you could give me the next slide. Oh, actually, I leave it on this slide for a second. I thought I had a slide in there that I don't have. My bad, y'all. So I work for the counseling center, like I said. All of you as APU students, I don't know if you know this, but you do now. You have 100% free, 100% confidential counseling services available to you 24/7 simply by being an APU enrolled student. So if you want to come check us out ever, the counseling center, we're located in Magnolia Court, which is in the Shire Lodge, which any of you that are commuters are not really familiar with the campus, like you basically go from here as far as you can walk that way until you're across the street from In-N-Out. That's where we're at. We're right next to the student health center there in the mods, the modular trailers beyond the baseball field. So you can walk in anytime. We're open 8:30 to 4:30. And you can also call us anytime, since I know people don't always get stressed out or have a mental health challenge between 8:30 and 4:30. Our phone line's 24/7. So that's this number here, 626-815-2109. 626-815-2109 if you want to put it in your phone, if you want to, it's on the website as well. It's on our Instagram if you follow us at APU Counseling. The interns do that and they're very good at it. But anyways, that's something that is always there for you, and we really encourage you to use it or encourage other people to use it. So I just always want to throw that in there. But can you go back a slide, please? So we're not going to do this in a breakout because, you know, that's too much to do a breakout. It's already 2:02. But I want you guys to think right now. This was a whole bunch of handouts I just handed you, a whole bunch of information that I gave you in the last hour or so. I want you to do two things. Think about what's the most surprising thing that you learned today, and try and remember that, right? Note it down in your mental mind, or even note it down on a piece of paper if you're the kind of person that takes notes, right? But what's the most surprising thing you learned today? And what's one thing that you can commit to practicing that we learned today, right? Maybe even this weekend, right? Or maybe even going into these next couple of weeks, right? What did you learn, and how can you actually use this? Psychology says if we make a behavioral intention, if we promise ourselves we'll actually try to do something, we're much more likely to actually do it. And so that'll improve, hopefully, your listening as we go along here. All right, everybody good? Everybody lock in those two facts in their mind? I love it. Okay, can you skip to the end, please? Or you can skip that one. That's not really relevant right now. Thank you so much. We're about to ask you a bunch of questions, but if you could go to one more. We have upcoming workshops. We got 4 more of these workshops. So if you want more SOTA credits, if your professor told you to go to more workshops, if you just love the sound of my voice, we'd love you to come to more workshops. Again, if you attend 4 of these workshops, we'll have to give you a certificate of completion for the program. You can put that on your resume and stuff, help start getting those internships and things like that. So we have sadness and depression is next week. Anxiety is the week after that. Conflicts and relationships. And then finally, we'll finish out with goal setting and time management the week before Thanksgiving break.